Hello everyone, today's video is about bile and diarrhea. It's a really fascinating video topic today. Just before jumping into the video, if you don't mind taking a quick moment to please like, share, subscribe, and or post a quick comment on the video, I'd really appreciate it. So thanks in advance for taking a second to do that. And as per usual, nothing that I'm saying should be construed as medical advice. This is for informational purposes only. If you need medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. So I decided to post this video because as the fates have conspired, I've had several patients in the last couple of weeks that have had issues relating to diarrhea and bile. And I just thought, I've never posted a video about this before, and I don't know if there's much content out there about it. So if someone's, searching for answers about bile and diarrhea, then, well, by golly, this is going to be the video for them. Anyways, I'll just get into it. So there are kind of two ways in which bile can be related to diarrhea. And somewhat ironically, it's that you could have not enough bile and that leads to diarrhea, or you can have too much bile and that leads to diarrhea. So how the heck can that possibly happen? Well, to illustrate by example, I had a patient recently who was, having an issue with like really urgent bowel movements, watery, urgent stool multiple times a day. It was really cramping his lifestyle. And so I said, well, what's been going on? How long has this been going on for? And basically he'd been taking and it had been going on for maybe a week or something like that. So not a super long time, but he'd been, did my sleuthing work, and it's like, okay, well, what are you taking? Well, taking magnesium as a supplement. Well, maybe it's too much magnesium. This patient had started taking some MSM, some methylsulfonylmethane, as part of a high-dose sulfur supplement. Said, well, maybe you don't need as much magnesium anymore. Said, well, he was lowering his dose of the magnesium, and was still having like these urgent bowel movements. Kind of like, okay, well, maybe that's still it. Maybe he's still taking too much magnesium, but it just didn't really seem to fit. That doesn't usually happen in that way with a high-dose sulfur protocol. But then one of the other things that had come up is that he'd been taking some ox bile, these 500 milligram ox bile capsules, which 500 milligrams is a fairly robust dose of supplemental ox bile. It's quite a bit lower dose than, say, a prescription strength, bile salts prescription for someone who's just really not making any bile whatsoever, but it's still, it's a fairly robust dose. I thought, well, that's a little bit strange because I've had plenty of patients who are taking ox bile. It really helps with their digestion of fat, seems to go really smoothly, but I have had a few patients over the course of time where they take ox bile and it gives them diarrhea. So I said, well, he's like, I've been taking this for, I don't know, maybe a month or something like that. No problem at all. It's been, helping with digestion of fats, making a positive change. It's like, well, it might be that you have enough bile now. It may be that this has helped to kind of top up your bile salts, and you don't need as much anymore because we recycle our bile salts as part of our enterohepatic circulation. And so long and short of it is stops the ox bile, and within a day no longer having urgent bowel movements anymore. Also, interestingly enough, still digesting fat really well, and not needing the bile. It's like, okay, good, looks like you topped up your bile salt levels. So what was happening in that case? Well, what was likely happening is that the patient didn't need as many bile salts anymore. He's making enough, and so the excess bile salts were making their way down into the large intestine, and when bile hits the large intestine, it is very stimulating, and this patient was experiencing that stimulating effect as watery diarrhea. So too much bile is something that can cause issues. If the too much bile can cause diarrhea from that stimulating effect. Now, as I was saying, not enough bile can also cause diarrhea, and so that would be a case where a patient is, having, say, a lot of like floating stool, probably malodorous stool, maybe like a really light clay-colored stool. Like, so typically, if it's like kind of really like loose and watery and floating and malodorous, that wouldn't likely, well, could be, but wouldn't necessarily have to be that, like, light or clay-colored stool. But if it's more of a form stool, then it could be very light color, clay-colored stool. If a patient was having diarrhea, if a patient does not have enough bile kicking around, then that's going to lead to a suboptimal absorption of fat. So I have this, I'll illustrate by example. So I have another patient. This patient is, seen this patient years and years ago for some other issue. They, contacted my office saying like, I have an urgent problem, having diarrhea like, 8 times a day, can't leave the house, just, really, really awful. And it's just really unfortunate situation. This has been going on for like quite a while. They went to see their family doctor, running all these tests, can't figure out what's going on. So, we talk about, what are the triggers and this and that. It turns out, well, fatty foods are a big trigger, and, it's really malodorous and floaty and all these lovely things that we get into, all these nitty gritty details in my office. And so I said, well, it sounds like you might not be producing enough bile and you're not absorbing your fat properly, because when fat hits the large intestine, not properly, when too much fat hits the large intestine, it also has a stimulating effect on the bowel and will also cause it'll also stimulate a bowel movement, and oftentimes a watery bowel movement. So that's the way and so with this patient, they started on ox bile, and within, I don't know, like 2 or 3 days, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so much better and everything's going great. So, think ox bile for the win. It's wonderful. So that's the way in which not enough bile can cause diarrhea, because too much fat hits the large intestine. You need bile in order to absorb fat in the intestinal tract. And then too much bile can also be a problem. To give one more just fun little example, I had another new patient visit not too long ago, and this patient has a history of gallbladder removal, and many folks, fortunately, when they have their gallbladders removed, they don't seem to be any worse for wear for it. Their digestion's just fine. Some folks get their gallbladders removed and they really can't tolerate fat well, and then some folks, unfortunately, get this bile dumping syndrome, where basically their livers, because the gallbladder, the purpose it serves is basically a storage sac for bile. The liver produces the bile, and then it goes through the biliary tree into the gallbladder, and so that little storage sac is just waiting for the signal of higher up the digestive tract that, oh, now there's enough fat in the intestines to say, okay, squirt it. The gallbladder contracts, it squirts that bile into the intestinal tract and starts to help with fat absorption. Unfortunately, what can happen sometimes is when the gallbladder is removed, kind of the checks and balances system gets thrown off, and there's just this kind of steady stream of bile dumping into the intestinal tract. And that's, as you could imagine, a very big problem, because then that bile is just getting into the large intestine and causing a lot of diarrhea. So with this patient, they had been on this I can't remember the exact product that it was on. It was something like cholestyramine. It might have been cholestyramine, but basically it's a bile acid binder, which is also used in the mold illness world because it can bind up mold toxins as well. But basically they were on a product like that, and it was really helping. So things were under control. But then this patient they were having some issues with mold actually, and so they're like, oh, I'm going to go on some tudka, tomato, which is a bile acid supplement, and it gave them like crazy diarrhea. I think they also tried an ox bile supplement, and that also gave them crazy diarrhea. Like, oh my gosh, like what's going on here? Am I having like a mold detox or whatever it was? It's like, nope, your problems that you had much bile acid, like too much bile in the first place, and your cholestyramine was binding that up, but then you added supplemental bile into the mix, and now you have too much bile again, and then that was causing the diarrhea issue. So anyways, these are some of the recent stories in my practice that I thought, you know what, I got to talk about bile. It's something where when we put on our thinking caps and kind of are aware of the physiology, it's like, I think it makes all the sense in the world. But these patients were just, really quite bewildered. It's like, what the heck is going on with me? The one patient, the second one I talked about, was suffering for months and months and months. She was like getting like, very, very, she's like, is my life ever going to be normal again? Am I ever going to be able to go out and not have to worry about, having issues finding a bathroom in time and things like that. So anyways, hopefully this information will be useful for folks out there to better understand biophysiology as it relates to diarrhea. So again, wonderfully interesting topic to talk about here, but I hope that it was of interest. So if anybody has any questions on this topic or on anything else, just post in the comment section below. I will do my best to answer as soon as I can.